So here is the new modifications of the Computable General Equilibrium Model that we are designing progressively. And here we introduce investment by firms. So what is firms investment? Firms investment is a purchase by firms of goods and services, and these goods and services will remain in the production process during several periods of production to make contributions to this production process. So this is not the case of intermediate consumption, which is fully incorporated in the output in one period of production, which means that intermediate consumption disappears after a unique period of production. So firms investments, this is machines, computers, trucks, equipment goods that will be useful during several periods of production. So first, it is a new demand for goods and services, and so we have to include this aspect within the model. But firms investment, this is also an augmentation of productive capital. So it means that capacities of production are increasing with investment. But here we are designing a static model. So we do not take into account this aspect of investment because we consider only one period. In a dynamic model, we should take into account this aspect and we should increase capacities of production in the next periods of time. So how does firms investment modify the Computable General Equilibrium Model? In fact, this model is modified through three channels. First, there is a purchase of goods and services in each sector. And in fact, if we add all this purchase, there is a total value of investment. So the total value of investment, we are going to call it INV for investment, of course. So it's the total purchase of goods and services for investment reasons at the level of the economy. Now, for each sector, what we are going to suppose is that there is a constant distribution in value. So in fact, behind that we have a cup de glace. So if INV is the total investment at the level of the economy, the purchase of each good in each sector is CKI, such that PI CKI is equal to a constant, which is called alpha underscore key I, times INV, the total investment. So it means that the total investment in the economy is a value of INV, and the purchase of goods consists in trucks, computers, equipment goods, and so the investment goods that are purchased are distributed among sectors according this constant distribution in value. The second channel is the modifications of the supply and demand equilibrium, because once we have determined, in fact, the level of purchase of goods in each sector for investment motivation, we have to take into account this new source of demand for goods and services in the supply-demand equilibrium condition. So this is the second channel. And third, of course, the macroeconomic equilibrium is modified because investment is a new source of demand for financing. So, how does firms' investment modify the macroeconomic equilibrium? So you remember that in the previous model, we had the macroeconomic equilibrium condition that was savings plus pub sold is equal to 0, that is to say household saving plus public sold is equal to 0. It was very simple. Now the new macroeconomic equilibrium conditions with investment is slightly different. It is savings minus investment plus public sold is equal to 0. That is to say we have saving minus investment, it is net private savings. Public sold, we have net public savings. So it looks like the new conditions is very similar to the previous condition, but in fact it differs a lot. So think about the previous condition, savings plus pub sold is equal to 0. So we know that savings is determined in another equation, which is savings is equal to disposable income times marginal propensity to save. So this equation, savings plus pub sold equals 0, determines pub sold. But now we have, in this new macroeconomic equilibrium conditions, we have savings minus investment plus pub sold is equal to 0. So if savings is determined elsewhere, it means that we have two potential candidates, two variables that can be determined by this new macroeconomic equilibrium condition. It is either INV, investment, or pub sold, the public sold. Okay, so let's consider the public budget constraint. So public budget constraint is very simple. It is public budget, public sold is equal to revenues minus expenses, public expenses. So we've got revenues from direct taxation, ITR times INC, and revenues from indirect taxation, that is to say, the indirect tax rate applied in each sector. And public expenses, it is called BUDG underscore EXP. So this equation determines either public expenses or pub sold. Why? Because the other endogenous variable are INC, which is determined elsewhere, PY and Y, which are also determined elsewhere. So it means that this public budget constraint either determines public expenses or the public sold. So let me think about it. Either we say that this public budget constraint determines public expenses or public sold. Well, if we let public sold varies, it's a problem. Why? Because let's consider the case of a study of variations in income tax rate or variations in indirect tax rate. So this is a policy shock. If you let the public sold vary, it means that you've got a second policy shock. Why? Because it's a Keynesian policy, boosting activity with an increase in, for example, with an increase in the public sold. So what the economists are used to do is to consider that the public sold is constant. So we write pub sold.fx is equal to initial value of pub sold, and we consider that the public budget constraint, direct taxations plus indirect taxations minus public expenses is equal to public sold. This equation determines BUDG underscore EXP, that is to say public expenses. And so it means that public sold is constant, public expenses is determined by the budget constraint, and we've got the macroeconomic equilibrium condition that determines INV, the level of investment in the economy. So here is the new social accounting matrix related to this new computable general equilibrium model. So here is the level of production in each sector, 5,000, 11,000, 9,500. The level of indirect taxation in each sector. The matrix of intermediate consumption. The matrix of remunerations of productive factor, labor and capital in each sector. And with these remunerations of productive factor, you've got the formations of income, of households' income. So 7,200 of remunerations of labor and 2,800 of remunerations of capital. So with this income, which is a total of 10,000, household can pay the income tax, which is 3,000, can also finance a final consumption in each sector, agriculture, industry, and services, and the rest is saved. That is to say, there is a capacity of financing by households of 700. Consider now public administration. So, in fact, there is a demand in each sector, 400, 1,500, and 2,300. But in fact, this level of expenses is less than the level of taxes collected by the public administration. So it means that there is a public surplus of 250. And so you've got net private savings of 700 by the private sector and net private public saving of 250. And so you have a total capacity of financing of 950. And so with this capacity of financing, in fact, it is possible to finance investment by firms, which is a demand of capital goods, 50 in the agricultural sector, 800 in the industrial sector, and 100 in the services sector. And so you see that the investment modifies the supply equal demand equilibrium in each sector, but also it modifies the macroeconomic equilibrium condition because it's in the column accumulations of capital. So you have to design this new computable general equilibrium model with firms' investment, and you have to calibrate it with data coming from the social accounting matrix that I just presented. And we would like you to study two shocks. The first shock is augmentations by 10% of labor supply, and the second shock is a decrease by 10% of the indirect tax rate. And this second shock, we would like you to study it under two configurations. First, the public expenses are constant, and second, the public solde is constant.